Some people leave your life quietly, but some leave a wound so deep it never fully closes. Daniel thought he had moved on. He thought he was ready. But the moment he walked through those hospital doors, he realized he had never stopped loving her at all. Subscribe to Soul of Kindness for more heart-touching stories. The call came at 2:47 in the morning. Daniel was sitting at his kitchen table, unable to sleep, staring at a half-empty cup of cold coffee. He had been doing that a lot lately, sitting in the dark, thinking about nothing and everything at the same time. His apartment was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that reminds you just how alone you really are. When his phone buzzed, he almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, but something made him pick it up. "Is this Daniel Carter?" a woman's voice said on the other end, calm, professional, a nurse's voice. "Yes," he said slowly. "Who is this?" "I'm calling from Mercy General Hospital. We found your name listed as an emergency contact for a patient named Claire Carter. She was brought in about an hour ago." Daniel stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. Claire. He hadn't heard her name spoken out loud in almost 3 years. Not since the divorce was finalized. Not since she handed him back the key to their apartment and walked away without turning around. "What happened?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "She collapsed at home. We're still running tests, but her condition is serious. Is there anyone else we should contact?" Daniel closed his eyes. "No," he said quietly. "There's no one else." He grabbed his jacket and his keys and drove to the hospital without even thinking. His hands moved on their own. His heart moved on its own too. The emergency room was bright and loud, full of the kind of noise that only exists in places where people are fighting to survive. Daniel walked to the front desk and told them who he was there for. A nurse with kind eyes led him down a long hallway and stopped outside a room with a closed door. "She's stable for now," the nurse said softly, "but the doctor will need to speak with you soon." "Can I see her?" Daniel asked. The nurse hesitated. "She did ask for you," she said, as if that surprised her. "She woke up for a few minutes, and the first name she said was yours." That stopped him cold. He pushed open the door slowly and stepped inside. Claire was lying in the hospital bed, connected to 2 different monitors, an IV line running into her right arm. Her dark hair was spread across the pillow. She looked smaller than he remembered, fragile in a way she never was when they were together. Claire had always been strong, stubborn, fierce, unbreakable. Seeing her like this felt like the world had been turned upside down. Her eyes were closed. He pulled a chair close and sat beside her, not saying a word. And then, very quietly, she said his name. "Daniel." Her voice was rough, barely there, like something worn down by too much weight. "I'm here," he said. "I'm right here." She didn't open her eyes, but her hand moved slowly across the blanket until it found his, and she held on. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Daniel sat there in the low light of that hospital room, holding his ex-wife's hand, listening to the soft beeping of the monitors, and trying very hard not to fall apart. 3 years. They had been apart for 3 years, and yet sitting there, it felt like no time had passed at all. It also felt like a lifetime. He thought about the day they met. She had been 24, working double shifts at a small diner while studying for her nursing degree. He had come in every Saturday morning for 3 months just to talk to her. She used to tease him about it, told him she had tipped herself in his name because he spent more time talking than eating. He had laughed so hard that day. He hadn't laughed like that in a very long time. They got married when she was 27. The wedding was small, just close friends, a garden, and fairy lights strung between old oak trees. She wore her mother's earrings. He cried before she even made it to the altar. It was the happiest day of his life. And then slowly, quietly, everything fell apart. Not from one big moment. Not from a single fight or a single mistake. It unraveled thread by thread. He worked too much. She carried too much alone. They stopped talking the way they used to. They stopped seeing each other, even when they were in the same room. And one evening, Claire sat down across from him at the dinner table and said, very calmly, "Daniel, I think we've both been pretending for a while now. He hadn't argued. That was the part that still haunted him. He hadn't argued. Now, sitting beside her hospital bed, he wondered if that silence had been the biggest mistake of his life. Claire woke up fully around 5 in the morning. She turned her head slowly and looked at him. Really looked at him. And for a moment, neither of them knew what to say. There was too much between them. Too many unsaid things piled up over too many years. "You came," she said finally. "Of course I came," Daniel said. "You were still listed as my emergency contact." The corner of her mouth curved slightly. "I know," she said. "I never changed it." He looked at her carefully. "Why not?" She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she said softly. "Maybe I just wasn't ready to fully let go of everything." Daniel leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "Claire, what happened?" "The nurse said you collapsed." She looked away toward the window where the early morning sky was turning a soft grey. "I've been sick for a while," she said. "I didn't want to make it a big thing." "How long?" he asked. She hesitated. "About a year." Daniel felt something cold move through his chest. "A year," he repeated slowly. "Claire?" "I'm handling it," she said, and the old firmness was back in her voice. That familiar wall going up? He had seen it 1,000 times. She would let him in just far enough, and then the door would close. "Who's been with you through this?" he asked. "Who's been helping you?" She didn't answer right away, and in that silence Daniel got his answer. No one. She had been going through it alone. The doctor came in at 7 and spoke to both of them together. Claire didn't stop him from staying in the room. That meant something, Daniel thought. That meant something. The diagnosis was serious. Her heart, a condition that had been developing quietly for years, undetected, working against her while she smiled, and worked and lived her life as if everything was fine. Surgery was needed, soon. After the doctor left, the room was very still. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Daniel asked. "Who was I supposed to tell?" Claire said, her voice flat but her eyes were wet. "Me," he said simply. "You could have told me." She laughed, a small broken sound. "Daniel, we're divorced. I couldn't call you every time something went wrong. That's not fair to you." "Claire." He stood up and walked to the window, then turned back to face her. "Do you know what the worst part of losing you was? It wasn't the empty apartment. It wasn't the quiet. It was knowing that somewhere out there you were dealing with things alone, and I wasn't allowed to be there anymore." She stared at him. Something shifted in her expression. The wall cracked just slightly. "You always did that," she whispered. "Did what?" "Said the exact right thing too late." It landed like a stone in still water. He felt the ripple of it all the way through. "Then let me say it now," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, Claire. I'm sorry for every moment I chose work over you, for every time I let the silence sit between us instead of breaking it. I'm sorry it took something like this for me to be back in this room with you." She was crying now, quietly, the way she always cried, like she was trying not to. "I'm scared," she admitted, and he knew how much it cost her to say those 2 words. Claire did not say she was scared, not ever. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of her bed and said, "Then I'll stay. For as long as you need me, I'll stay." He didn't leave. For 3 days, Daniel barely left the hospital. He went home once to change clothes, once to grab her a book she mentioned, Loving, a worn paperback about a woman who travels the world alone and finds herself along the way. He had remembered her mentioning it years ago. She looked at him when he handed it to her and didn't say anything for a long moment. "You remembered," she said. "I remember everything," he replied quietly. Her sister flew in from Denver on the 2nd day. Her name was Mara, sharp-eyed and protective, someone who had always been a little suspicious of Daniel, even during the good years. She walked into the hospital room, saw him sitting beside Claire's bed, and stopped in the doorway. "You're here," Mara said, not accusingly, just surprised. "He's been here since the first night," Claire said from the bed. There was something soft in her voice when she said it. Mara looked at Daniel for a long time. Then she put down her bag, sat on the other side of the bed, and reached for Claire's other hand. No more was said about it, but something had shifted. That evening, while Claire was sleeping, Mara stepped into the hallway with Daniel. "She cried every day for 6 months after the divorce," Mara said bluntly. "She never told you that. She didn't want you to feel guilty." Daniel looked at the floor. "She built this whole wall around herself," Mara continued. "Told herself she was fine. Told me she was fine. But I'm her sister. I know what fine looks like, and it didn't look like that." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know I hurt her." Mara studied him. "What are you planning to do about it?" He looked up. "Whatever she'll let me." The surgery was scheduled for the 4th morning. The night before, neither of them could sleep. They sat together in the low light of her hospital room and they talked, really talked, the way they used to in the early years, before life got heavy and silence became easier than honesty. She told him things she had never told him during their marriage, about the loneliness she had swallowed down every night he worked late, about the way she had convinced herself that needing him was a weakness, about the moment she decided to ask for the divorce, sitting in her car outside a grocery store, crying over nothing and everything. Realizing she hadn't felt truly seen in so long, she had forgotten what it felt like. He listened to every word. He didn't defend himself. He didn't make excuses. He just listened. And then he told her things too, about the months after she left, about how he had thrown himself deeper into work because the apartment was unbearable, about the afternoon he drove past their old neighborhood and had to pull over because he couldn't see through the tears, about how he had picked up the phone to call her 100 times and always put it back down because he thought she was better off without him. "I thought I was doing the kind thing," he said quietly, "leaving you alone, not pulling you back." Claire shook her head slowly. "The kind thing would have been to fight," she whispered. "I needed you to fight, Daniel. Not for me, for us." He reached out and took her hand. "I know," he said. "I know that now." She looked at their joined hands. Then she looked up at him with eyes that had been through too much for too long. "What if tomorrow doesn't go well?" she asked. "It will," he said firmly. "But what if it doesn't?" He held her gaze. "Then you'll know, before you go anywhere, that you were the love of my life. From the very first Saturday morning at that diner, every single day since then, even when I was too foolish and too proud to show it the way you deserved." She closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek. "Don't let me go in there tomorrow thinking about regret," she said softly. "Tell me something good." So he talked to her until she fell asleep. He told her about the garden wedding and the fairy lights, about the first time she laughed at his terrible cooking and burned her tongue on soup she was too impatient to let cool, about the road trip they took when they were first married, getting lost in the mountains, laughing so hard at nothing, young and terrified and wildly in love. He talked until her breathing slowed and deepened. Then he sat in the chair beside her bed and watched her sleep. And he made a silent promise to whatever was listening, that if she came through this, he would not waste another day. The surgery lasted 6 hours. Daniel sat in the waiting room with Mara, both of them quiet, both of them watching the door. Mara brought 2 cups of coffee at some point. Neither of them drank it. The clock on the wall moved with unbearable slowness. He thought about every version of the next moment. The door opening to good news. The door opening to something else. He prayed in the way people pray when they are desperate, not with practiced words, but with everything raw and honest and unpolished. Please, just please. When the surgeon finally walked through the door, his face was calm and measured, the practiced expression of someone who delivers news every day. Daniel stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. "She did well," the surgeon said. "The procedure was successful. She's in recovery now." Mara made a sound beside him, something between a sob and a laugh. She grabbed Daniel's arm without thinking, and he grabbed her back. And they stood there in the middle of that waiting room, 2 people who had once been almost family, holding on to each other with pure relief. When they let Claire have visitors, Daniel walked in slowly. She was pale and tired, her eyes heavy from the anesthesia, but when she saw him, something crossed her face, something warm and real that she didn't try to hide. "Still here?" she murmured. "Still here," he said. He sat beside her and took her hand, gently, carefully, the way you hold something you almost lost. For a while they didn't need words. The room was quiet. The monitors beeped softly. Somewhere down the hall, a baby was crying. A new life beginning just as another was being given back. 3 months later, on a quiet Saturday morning, Daniel walked into a small cafe near the hospital. Claire was already there, sitting by the window, wrapped in a light blue sweater, her hands around a warm cup. She looked better. She looked like herself again, bright-eyed, a little guarded, but there, alive in the most complete sense of the word. He sat across from her and she smiled. They didn't have labels yet. Not boyfriend and girlfriend. Not husband and wife. Not even officially together. Just two people who had loved each other, lost each other, and been pulled back together by something stronger than either of them could explain. "You know what I've been thinking about?" Claire said, wrapping both hands around her cup. "What?" Daniel asked. "That road trip," she said quietly. "Getting lost in the mountains. That terrible map you refused to throw away." Daniel laughed softly. "I was very confident in that map. You were completely wrong about that map." "I was completely wrong about a lot of things," he said, his smile fading into something gentler. "But not about you. Never about you." She looked at him across the table. The morning light fell across her face. "So what do we do now?" she asked. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "We start over," he said simply. "Slower this time. Kinder this time. We say the things we should have said. We stay when it gets hard." He paused. "And we never ever let the silence win again." She looked down at his hand on hers. Then she looked up. "And she didn't pull away. Some people come back into your life not to repeat the past, but to finally get it right. Love is not just about the beautiful moments. It is about choosing each other through every quiet, difficult, ordinary day. Don't wait for a hospital room to say what your heart already knows. It is never too late until it is.